All right, man, peace. You know, brothers, I remember watching Paul Pierce in college when he played with the Kansas Jayhawks. I believe that he was teammates with Rafe LaFrentz, if I remember correctly. If I'm wrong about that, one of you brothers can correct me. But I remember watching his game. Even though he always appeared to be moving very slow, he would always beat his man off the dribble. And his offensive game was extremely diverse. He reminded me a lot of a slightly taller version of Mark Aguirre. Very physical, very strong lower body, great mid-range game. Could even stretch you out to the three-point line, take you to the cup, make his free throws. Very, very, very proficient offensive weapon. And of course, he had his coming out party against the Los Angeles Lakers. I think it was in 2000. It may have been the first year that the Lakers won the title, where he had something like 46 points in LA. And Shaquille O'Neal gave him the nickname The Truth. And every time I think about Paul Pierce and that nickname, I think about Beanie Siegel's first album and the title track called The Truth. I think about Paul Pierce. Fortunately for him, he was able to win an NBA title so that he could stand out from amongst his peers in that generation, that very underrated generation of players who came into the NBA from the mid to late 90s and retired in the early 2000s. He was right there with the Kobes, the Vince Carters, the Tracy McGrady's, the Allen Iversons, Steve Nash's, Jason Kidd's, so on and so forth. Kevin Garnett's, Tim Duncan's, as being one of the great players of that era from the late 90s all the way through the late 2000s. So he decided to stop by the Stephen A. Smith and Max Kellerman show to give his insight, his perspectives on certain things that are transpiring across the NBA, particularly pertaining to Kyrie Irving of the Boston Celtics, as well as LeBron James and the Los Angeles Lakers. So they're going to talk about it. I'm going to chime in.
Max, those Raptors are good. If only you were high on them. Even without Kawhi Leonard, right?
Tell people.
Well, maybe you might call them The Truth, like this dude. So good to have you with us.
Good to be here.
Paul, we so appreciate you. So much we want to get into with you, obviously, but I want to start with Kyrie Irving being salty at Jamal Murray, going for the 50th point there.
You know what? If I was Jamal Murray, I would have went for the 52.
Yeah.
Of course you would have, brother, because you're a master troll. Everybody knows that. Paul Pierce is one of the great trash talkers and great trolls in recent NBA history. Many of you brothers who go back will remember that Paul Pierce was almost murdered due to an incident inside of a club where he was talking junk to a bunch of dudes that he should not have been talking junk to, and they stabbed him up. Fortunately, the brother was able to live through that incident and fulfill his destiny as a great NBA player.
But it's not every day you can go out and get 50. I only scored 50 once in my career. So, I mean, I understand Kyrie's frustration. You know, it's just a basketball rule. At the end of the game, you don't take the shot. It's an unspoken rule, especially when you're leading, not to take the shot. And that's probably, you know, why.
Well, is that about the 50, or is that about the fact that Kyrie is frustrated because they're 6-4, they've lost 2 in a row, they haven't looked great, trying to just, you know, get everybody, you know, into the mix with Gordon Hayward and others, not to mention how Toronto is looking.
It's a combination of all that, because, you know, Boston should be a lot better than they are right now, and they will be, because they're trying to figure out the chemistry issues with Kyrie, Gordon Hayward back. They're so deep. They got to understand each and every...
I completely agree. As a matter of fact, I stated coming into the season that they were going to have some chemistry issues with that team because they're a little bit too deep at certain positions, especially at their wings. Their wings are going 3 deep, and everybody is not going to be able to get playing time. At the point guard position, you have Kyrie, you have Rozier, you have Marcus Smart. At the shooting guard position, you have Jaylen Brown. Once again, you have Marcus Smart. You even have Jason Tatum, who's able to play a little bit of the 2 spot if you need him to, even though he's primarily a 3. And then, of course, you have the issue between Tatum and Gordon Hayward, and then Gordon Hayward and Marcus Morris. Are they both going to play the 4? I guess it depends on whether you want to go small or go big. So they're suffering from an abundance of riches. But it's a good problem to have, especially if you're Danny Ainge and you want to potentially package a major deal for Anthony Davis.
And every night it's going to be a different person. It's not like you have a team where you're like, this is our leading scorer, you guys fall in line. They have so many guys that can score. Tatum, Brown, Gordon.
Who did you pick coming out of the East at the start of this season? What was your preseason prediction?
Boston Celtics. Based on what they did last year, pushing Cleveland to Game 7 without Kyrie and Gordon, they have to be the obvious.
And how are you feeling now?
I still feel good about them.
Okay.
You know, Toronto, they're good, but Boston, they need a little more time. You know, they're still implementing those guys. Like I said, Kyrie and Gordon, these guys are coming off surgeries, being out all last year, most of last year. So I think in the end, in the 7-game series, they're going to be a tough
I think
out.
one of the reasons people didn't like Toronto more is we saw what happened to them last year, but the difference is they didn't have a best player good enough. Now they got Kawhi as their best player.
You don't think DeRozan was good enough?
No, not good enough.
Hell no. Clearly he was not good enough, Paul Pierce. I mean, give me a break. I'm going to say this again. Whenever your best player goes public with having psychological issues and mental problems that are relatively consistent with being a manic depressive, he automatically loses esteem across the NBA in regards to leadership abilities. All of his rivals now know that he can be broken, that you can put doubt into his mind. So that's not something that you want to admit. I know that in this PC world that we live in, everybody wants to be more open in regards to their flaws and their weaknesses, but you also have to consider that as a professional athlete, you're in a competitive environment where people are always going to be looking for your Achilles heel. For you to jump on television and expose it to the world when you're supposed to be the alpha on your team, it was not shrewd, it was not prudent.
Be the best player on the team gets you to the finals. No, he's not. He's not good enough.
Yeah,
He's really good. He's not good enough. There are levels to this, Paul, as you know. Hall of Famer. You know how that goes. So the point is that let's put aside the Raptors. It's going to come down to them and the Celtics, except that I saw the Celtics basically not miss a three through 3/4 of a game at home against Milwaukee. And it came down to basically a one-possession game. How much of a threat is Milwaukee right now to these guys?
Milwaukee's a huge threat. That's why I state once again that in the Eastern Conference, the playoffs, especially from the second round onward, are going to be just as, if not more, compelling than what's going on in the West, especially if Houston continues to struggle like they have. Right now in the Eastern Conference, if you have two playoff matchups involving the Boston Celtics, the Toronto Raptors, the Milwaukee Bucks, and the Philadelphia 76ers, that's going to be must-watch television right there.
Well, they're a threat because they have the best player in the Eastern Conference. I mean, the Greek Freak, he's playing out of his mind.
Well, it's disputable whether or not the Greek Freak is actually better than Kawhi Leonard. That's going to be a great matchup. I'm not quite sure if Milwaukee has played Toronto yet this year.
To me, he's the most versatile player in the game right now. I mean, his athleticism, he's got better, he's matured, he's had his playoff woes from last year, the year before.
The only issue with the Greek Freak is that he has to extend his range. And we all know that, especially in the playoffs where they're going to try to pack the paint, particularly if Milwaukee's not hitting their threes. He's going to have to show that he can make, at the very least, a consistent mid-range jumper.
Getting knocked out early, and he's matured beyond belief, and he's taking this team to the next step. You have to give credit to Coach Bud also. I think he's really transformed that team into an offensive threat. They're shooting the three better.
He's done a great job. And he was also very good in Atlanta. And in Atlanta, he had no alpha there. I believe their pseudo-alpha was Al Horford.
So they're definitely a threat in the East.
Has anybody noticed that we entered this season talking about Toronto and Boston and just everybody else in the East, to adding Milwaukee into the equation, but also minimizing Philly? Philly has sort of fallen off in our mind's eye.
Now let me say this. This interview was held before Philadelphia was able to acquire Jimmy Butler. I believe that the Jimmy Butler acquisition will vault Philadelphia into real conversations over whether or not they're going to be able to compete with the Bostons and with the Torontos and the Milwaukees. Because now in the Jimmy Butler, you have a player that you can say, okay, go guard Kawhi. Okay, we're going to put you on Kyrie Irving for stretches so that you can see if you can wear him down a little bit. When you combine him and Markelle Fultz, now you have two players who are at least athletic enough to compete defensively against many of the more athletic wings that are on Toronto and on Boston.
We're not even thinking about them in the conversation of the top three teams in the East.
Yeah, I think they lost. I think they took steps back. The additions they had with Ilyasova, the shooting they lacked this year. They don't have the same shooting. Then they're trying to implement Fultz into his role this year. I think they took a couple steps back, even though Ben Simmons probably got better. Embiid got better, but just their depth isn't the same.
I'm worried about, excuse me for the second, because I brought up Fultz for a reason. I don't want to hear any more excuses about this guy. I really, really don't. I mean, listen, I understand he's only a second-year player, and he only came back. He only played just a handful, a few games last year.
Well, here's the issue with Markelle Fultz right now. And I understand where Stephen A. is coming from. It's very obvious that the brother is struggling psychologically with something. But the onus is going to be placed on him to expedite his development because he was a number 1 overall draft pick. And in the history of the NBA, number 1 overall draft picks at most get 1 season to develop. And normally they're expected to make a splash right away.
Tail end of the season. But this dude, I mean, it's Paul, I don't think I've ever seen this in all my years covering the NBA. They were actually cheering when he made a 3-point shot earlier this season. They actually damn near gave him a standing ovation for making a 3. That is as bad.
Before he came out of college, I had never really seen him play. He pretty much came out of nowhere in my view. But, you know, I'm not an avid college basketball watcher. I really have not been since probably the early 2000s. But when I saw him play, even in the highlights, it was not very impressive to me. I think that he looked like a serviceable NBA player. But I don't see anything that's particularly overwhelmingly explosive about his style of play. And that's not even speaking about his issues with the jump shot.
As it gets, how concerned should we be about Fultz?
You know, to be the number 1 pick, you know, I think, you know,
I've already stated, if Steph Curry and Klay Thompson are the Splash Brothers, Ben Simmons and Markelle Fultz, they're the bricklayers.
They're looking like, man, we could have had Jason Tatum at that spot.
They traded a pick.
Oh, man, he would have been the perfect player in that system with those guys.
They looked at Tatum and said, "No, we'll give you extra to turn Tatum into this dude."
Now you're talking about building a core around Embiid, Simmons, and Tatum.
But I think the only part I think y'all missing is this: Boston had the number 1 pick. They were going to take Tatum. It's just that Danny Ainge knew that he could hoodwink the Sixers into getting a first-round pick.
Let me tell you something.
Yeah, because Danny Ainge probably heard through the grapevine that Philadelphia thought that Boston was going for Fultz, and they wanted to take Fultz. So Danny Ainge hoodwinked them.
Still ended up getting Jason Tatum.
Well, I'm saying that then when they traded up, they should have taken Tatum.
Danny Ainge is the finesse king. He's just finessing these GMs around the league, and I don't.
He damn sure is the finesse king. He finessed your ass out of Boston, sent you to the Brooklyn Nets.
I don't even know. He's a genius out here.
No.
Larry Bird is on record as stating that Danny Ainge, back in 1987 or 88, went to the general manager of the Boston Celtics at the time, I believe it was still Red Auerbach, and told Red Auerbach, you need to trade Larry Bird before he gets old because he's starting to show signs of aging. That's what Larry Bird said Danny Ainge told Red Auerbach. This is back in like 1988. So Danny Ainge has always been cutthroat.
I don't know how he keeps doing it.
All right, we're out here in your city, LA. Let's talk about these Lakers. The guys were debating it earlier if Luke Walton should be on the hot seat. What do you think?
That's a tough situation because when you bring in LeBron and then you combine that with the Lakers, there's expectations come with that.
Absolutely.
You know, if they're struggling midway, you got to give them at least 25 to 30 games to see where you're going to be at right now, because you got to understand LeBron been on teams where they started slow and they picked it up. I know he's a little older, but this is still LeBron James. You got to give his team time to gel. 25, 30 games, you see where they at, then you got to evaluate. You got to evaluate.
Here's a question for you. Do you believe Magic Johnson when Magic Johnson says Luke is safe for this year?
I think he's safe for now.
For the year.
For the year?
Do you
Right, well, the year is what? 2018. Is Magic talking about the calendar year or the basketball season? That's the real question. When he says Luke is safe for the year, that most likely just means the year of 2018, because come next year, that's around the time that we start looking at who we want to trade, who can we acquire. We're starting to come down the stretch run towards the All-Star break. So I'm sure that if Magic Johnson stated that Luke Walton is safe for the year, he's not talking about the basketball season. He's talking about the calendar year of 2018.
Believe Magic Johnson when he says that? I don't.
I think it depends on, like I said, after 25, 30 games, Magic is going to look and be like, all right, if things ain't going right, they still sitting around the 9th, 10th seed, and they under 500, he might pull the plug.
But do you think that's the problem, coaching?
Oh, man. Listen.
Molly Karam, we're talking about LeBron James. Who else are they going to blame other than the head coach? They're not going to blame LeBron. So it's not a matter of whether coaching is the problem or not. LeBron James is viewed as being the solution for every problem. And he is the person that they coveted to come onto the Los Angeles Lakers franchise to bring them back to prominence. So what are they going to do? They're going to keep Luke Walton and tell LeBron, you just have to play harder? No, that's never going to happen.
Listen, I don't know. I don't think they just have the right fit, that team. You know, we used to see LeBron around guys like shooters. You know, they have a lot of playmakers and inexperience. I mean, I know they got Rondo, who has experience. Lance Stevenson's been deep in the playoffs. JaVale McGee, of course. But it just doesn't seem like the right fit. And then they're not that good on defense.
Well, how much of it, though, is that when he was in the East, LeBron's game is so absurd that he could take a team without any other great players and drag them kicking and screaming to the finals, right? Mm-hmm. Now you're in the West. In the West, you probably need another great player. Yeah, is there anyone on the roster now who has the chance to be that guy this season, or are they going to have to make a move?
They're going to have to make a move, Max Kellerman. We all know that. And if you're Magic Johnson, you're most likely going to say to yourself, especially if the Lakers are 10 games or better over 500, say by the All-Star break, you say to yourself, you know what? We're going to stand pat for the rest of the season. We're going to let these young boys continue to show how valuable a chip they can be for another team. And then at the end of the year, if we win 51, 52 games, go out in the third round, then we can call up a New Orleans or we can call up another team and see if we can get another top-level superstar player and maybe 2 shooters, and possibly package Alonzo Ball or Brandon Ingram, a couple of draft picks or what have you.
I think they need to make a move this year. There's not a guy on the roster this year, but I do think Ingram or the young fella, you know, I think the young fella, Kuzma, I think he got a shot, but not this year. I think they're a couple years away to like really trying to reach their potential, maybe become an all-star, but not this year.
Are y'all ready for this? I'm going to say something. I didn't bring it up. I'm going to bring it up to my man, Paul.
Mm-hmm.
You know who I think the Lakers should get on the phone with? I think the Lakers should get on the phone with the Washington Wizards and do everything in their power, except LeBron, obviously, and Kuzma. They should keep those 2, and Josh Hart. They should do everything they can to get Bradley Beal. And if you got to trade Brandon Ingram to do it, do it. If you got to take that damn Otto Porter to do it, do it.
Trade Hart for me.
Well, let me say this about Bradley Beal. Bradley Beal's one of these guys who's going to give you a very cheap 22 points per game. That's how I see him. He has a very beautiful stroke. He's going to shoot about 45% from the field. He's going to average somewhere between 19 and 22 a game. But if you get him in a big spot, he's not going to hit a big jump shot. I've seen him in plenty of playoff games, particularly against Boston, where he could have made the difference if he was as good as he tries to act like he is. And he misses a lot of big shots, especially in pressure situations. Bradley Beal's an okay player. But to me, he thinks that he's better than he really is. And then unfortunately for him, he's playing with another player who thinks that he's better than he really is. Because all John Wall is a crackhead version of Russell Westbrook. He's going to shoot the same percentage, except he's going to average about 10 less points per game and about 4 less rebounds per game. And to be quite honest with you, I'll probably be covering this in another video. It's very apparent to me that John Wall has an issue with alcohol. Allegedly, just looking at his face and looking at some of his recent conduct.
But like even getting Bradley Beal, you know, how much does that make the Lakers? How much better?
They need a shooter. They don't have a shooter.
You're saying it's way bigger than that.
It's bigger than that. The problem.
It's a lot bigger than that. Bradley Beal is not putting you over the hump.
Problems is bigger than that. I mean, they get another All-Star. It's bigger. Yeah, they get an All-Star in Bradley Beal, but how much of a leap do they take?
That's what I'm hearing from you.
How much of a leap do they take?
I thought I was talking to the truth. Yeah. That's what I thought I was talking to the truth.
He's trying to tell you, dumbass, the truth. It's just that unfortunately you seem to think that you're some type of basketball maven, where if anybody disagrees with you, they must be incorrect. What has Bradley Beal done in the NBA that supposedly he's the guy that's going to put the Lakers over the top? If you trade Bradley Beal, if you're the Washington Wizards and you trade Bradley Beal and you're getting back Brandon Ingram and possibly Kyle Kuzma or whoever, that's a steal for you. That's an absolute steal. Because Bradley Beal's not a superstar. He's really a low-level third-tier NBA star.
The truth shall make you free.
Listen.
Not set you free, make you free. I'm getting biblical here. Here's the deal, Paul Pierce. You know good and damn well if you are LeBron James or somebody, you got to have somebody to throw the ball to put it in the hole. Yep. You can be as beautiful as you want to be. Rondo had you and Ray Allen. Who
He got guys. He can put it in the basket.
Hart can shoot.
They can't shoot like Bradley Beal.
Absolutely. Offense is not the problem with the Lakers. They're one of the top scoring teams in the NBA. Their issue is defense.
Bill, y'all.
Okay, you're talking about couple percentage points difference.
Oh, Lord.
Look, I don't even see the shooting as a problem, though, to tell you the truth. That's only a problem so far.
That defense is terrible.
The defense. Now, Paul, how do you address the defense when we've seen LeBron in the last 5 years or so, because he has to preserve himself to make that playoff run. He cannot...
No, he has to preserve himself to make that stat run. That's what he's preserving himself for. Now, the Lakers have done a little bit to try to rectify some of their defensive issues by acquiring Tyson Chandler. But they still need some help when it comes to perimeter defense.
Lead by example on defense. If you don't have self-motivated guys on defense, a LeBron team's not going to play defense. How do they address that?
It's going to be hard in the regular season because you got older guys like Rondo. He's a great defender, but for an 82-game season, it's tough on those guys. They're in their 30s. You'll see them play better defense in the playoffs. They needed Tyson Chandler. They need that shot blocker back there because when JaVale McGee came out the game,
shot block.
I mean, they need something that somebody that can protect
rebounds.
them.
He'll
help their defense. He'll help their defense.
Let me ask you this: who do you have going to the Western Conference Finals right now?
The Western Conference Finals, I have, of course, the Golden State Warriors, and the team that they're going to match up with. As of right now, I'm not quite sure, to be honest with you, because based off of what I've seen from the Rockets, they're going into a tailspin that they may not recover from. Now, as of right now, supposedly they're in the process of waiving Carmelo Anthony. I knew that he was going to be the fall guy for their issues. I'm not sure if they're going to be able to rebound because I see Chris Paul as a player who's over the mountain. I think that he's over the hill, to be very honest with you, and on his way down. I think that he's blown up. He's just way too bloated. He's not fast on his feet anymore. He still has good hands defensively. We know that James Harden never has been a good defender, but due to the fact that they've lost Ariza, and then when you add a Carmelo Anthony, you're adding a player with no offense and no defense. So it was only a matter of time before they got rid of him. When we look at the other teams, the Spurs, of course, are always a threat. But do I see the Spurs beating two teams in the playoffs? No, not really. Denver, I'm not quite sure what to expect from them right now. Portland is off to a very good start, but we already know who Portland is. New Orleans, they got off to a very good start, but they fell off after Anthony Davis got a very mysterious elbow issue or elbow injury. And in regards to the other teams, I mean, Minnesota, they're done. They're not going to make the playoffs. Phoenix is not going to make the playoffs. Dallas is not going to make the playoffs. Sacramento right now, they're a young team that's really feeling themselves, but they're not going to make the playoffs most likely. So, I mean, to be honest with you, that number 2 spot in the West is pretty wide open. OKC, Westbrook is injured right now. When he does come back, I expect them to be one of the top tier teams. They have a great defense. But there should not be any major threats to the Golden State Warriors getting back to the finals. I think that there are going to be a couple of teams that push them to 5 or 6 games. I don't think that they're going to be able to coast through the West like they have or like they did 2 years ago. But we're going to find out.
Oh, that's a tough one.
Tough, right?
It's definitely, you got Golden State, but it's so wide open.
Denver for real?
Denver's for real. Denver's for real. I'm telling you, them young boys can play. I like the mix on their team. Joker.
They do have a nice mix. I'm just not quite sure if their lack of experience in the playoffs is going to show. They have the brother from Atlanta, Millsap, who's had some playoff experience, but in regards to those other young dudes on their team, we'll see.
Jokic, he's showing to be an all-star for sure. And
Jalen was right about that.
He could be the best center in the game.
Are they this?
No, he's not the best center in the game. He's very, very skilled offensively. But the best center in the game right now, I mean, if you still consider Anthony Davis a center, you probably have to give it to him. And also, of course, you have Joel Embiid.
This year's Utah Jazz, or is Utah Jazz still the Utah Jazz and we just got another
Oh, and I forgot about Utah. Utah's going to be a threat. They're going to be a problem, especially if they get their offense together.
player now?
I'm not so sure about the Utah Jazz. They got a young player leading them. They're still inexperienced, but I like what Denver's doing. I think it's going to be Denver, truthfully. They got depth. They got depth.
A money man.
Who else?
That's scoring the clutch and everything. Gonna sit up there and act like the Lakers don't need a shooter. That's not that important. You a all people.
No, they need a shooter, but they need a little.
Stephen A. Smith is embarrassed that a legendary NBA player is on the panel and disagreed with him.
A little more than that.
I know that, but then let's not minimize. You trying to put
tape on a broken glass. You can't. The water's still gonna leak.
The water's gonna leak, Stephen A. All right, you know what it is. Oh, you'll be right back here tomorrow. Beal, Scott, CJ, then
be a shooter
for NBA Countdown. Looking forward to it. Thanks for coming.
Yes,
appreciate
yes, good to be.
When we come back, more.
But anyway, that's basically it on that. We'll see how things turn out over the course of this NBA season. So peace.